Most people can recite Psalm 23 by heart, but very few have ever stopped to notice the secret hidden inside it. We hear it at funerals, in songs, in prayers, but the life-changing truth it carries is often missed. This isn't just poetry. It's not just a comforting passage to get us through hard times. Buried in these words is a promise so powerful, it can completely shift the way you see your life, your struggles, and even your future. And the surprising part, it's right there in front of us, in plain sight. But most people never catch it. Once you see it, you'll never read Psalm 23 the same way again. Psalm 23 is one of those passages almost everyone has heard, whether they grew up in church or not. You hear it at funerals, whispered like a blanket of comfort over grieving hearts. You see it written on greeting cards, hanging on walls in hospitals, or recited by someone going through a storm in life. Even people who wouldn't call themselves religious can often repeat the words, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." It has become like a universal song of peace, recognized across cultures and generations. But here's the strange thing. Because it's so familiar, many people stop short at the surface meaning. They read it, they nod along, but they don't take time to dig into the depth of what David was really saying. And that's where the problem is. Something can be so well known that it becomes overlooked. It's like walking past a priceless painting every day without ever stopping to study the details. Psalm 23 is not just a set of comforting words. It is a window into God's heart, a doorway into understanding how He relates to us. If all we ever see is a few nice lines about peace and comfort, we'll miss the hidden secret that has the power to actually change our lives. That's why this psalm is often quoted in times of trouble, but not always lived out in daily life. People love the sound of it, but they miss the reality of it. And that's exactly what we're going to uncover. Why David chose these words, what they meant to him, and why they carry a hidden truth that most people never see. Because Psalm 23 wasn't written for the dead, it was written for the living. It's not just about comfort in the valley of death, it's about confidence in the middle of life. And until you see that, you're missing the very secret that can transform the way you walk with God today. To really understand Psalm 23, you have to understand the man who wrote it. David's life wasn't polished or simple. He wasn't some monk sitting in quiet meditation when these words came to him. He was a man who lived through chaos, fear, betrayal, and triumph. Before he was king, he was just a shepherd boy, overlooked by his own family. When the prophet Samuel came to anoint the next king of Israel, David's father didn't even bother to bring him into the room at first. That's how invisible he was to people. Yet this forgotten shepherd boy would become the one chosen by God. Out in the fields, caring for sheep, David learned firsthand what it meant to protect, guide, and sacrifice for something weaker than himself. He fought off lions and bears with his own hands to save those sheep. That's not theory, that's lived experience. Later, David would stand before Goliath with nothing but a sling and a stone, showing the courage that comes when you know the Lord is with you. He would serve King Saul, then run for his life as Saul turned against him, hiding in caves, betrayed by people he thought were friends. He knew the bitterness of being hunted, the loneliness of exile, and the weight of carrying guilt after his own failures, like when he fell into sin with Bathsheba. This was not a man who lived a perfect life. He was deeply flawed, yet deeply aware of God's grace. So when David says, "The Lord is my shepherd," it's not a sweet line to fit on a plaque. It's the voice of a man who knew what it was like to be weak and in danger, who had seen death up close, who had been both hero and sinner. He wasn't writing pretty words for poetry's sake. He was writing survival truth. Every phrase in Psalm 23 carries the weight of his journey, from the lonely fields of Bethlehem to the bloody battlefields of Israel, from the throne of a king to the floor of repentance. David's story is proof that these words are more than comfort. They are battle-tested promises. And when you realize who he was, suddenly the psalm takes on a whole new power. It's not just words, it's a testimony. The Lord is my shepherd. It's the very first line, and it sets the tone for everything else that follows. To most modern readers, it sounds poetic, maybe even sentimental. But to the people of David's time, this was a shocking statement. Shepherds were not admired. They were poor, dirty, and often looked down on by society. So why would David compare the Lord of the universe to a shepherd? Because he knew exactly what it meant. A shepherd wasn't just someone who walked around with sheep. It was someone who carried the full responsibility for their lives. Sheep are defenseless. They don't fight back. They don't run fast. They don't have sharp teeth or claws. Without a shepherd, they are easy prey for wolves, lions, and thieves. They also wander off constantly, often getting stuck in dangerous places or separated from the flock. Sheep can't survive on their own, and that's the point. David looked at his life, with all his victories and failures, and he knew, on his own, he was just like a sheep, vulnerable, helpless, in need of someone to watch over him. But here's where the secret lies. Notice what David says. The Lord is my shepherd. Not a shepherd, not the shepherd of Israel, but my shepherd. This isn't distant. It's personal. The God who created the heavens, who commands armies of angels, is willing to stoop down and take on the role of a lowly shepherd for the sake of his people. That's the mystery most people miss. It's not about us being sheep. It's about him being the shepherd. The weight of the psalm rests not on our weakness, but on his strength. Think about it. Everything that follows in Psalm 23, rest, provision, peace, restoration, protection, depends on this one truth. It's not our ability to find green pastures or still waters. It's not our ability to fight off enemies or walk bravely through the valley of death. It's the shepherd who does it. The moment you realize this, everything changes. Psalm 23 isn't a call to try harder. It's an invitation to trust deeper. I shall not want. It sounds simple, almost too simple, but this little phrase carries a depth most people never stop to notice. At first glance, it seems like David is saying, God gives me everything I want. That's how many read it, like a blank check from heaven. But that's not what he means. David isn't saying, I get whatever I ask for. He's saying, with the Lord as my shepherd, I lack nothing. There's a huge difference. Want, in this verse, doesn't mean desire. It means lack. It's about contentment, about living without the gnawing hunger that drives so many of us. When David says, I shall not want, he's declaring that with God, his soul is complete. Think about how radical that is. This is the same David who lived in caves, running for his life, who faced hunger, betrayal, and hardship. Yet he still says, I shall not want. He doesn't say this from a palace, with riches stacked around him. He says it as a man who has experienced both abundance and scarcity, yet discovered that the presence of the shepherd was enough. That's the hidden promise people miss. This isn't about material comfort. It's about spiritual contentment. Most of the world is restless, chasing after more money, more recognition, more success, more love, more of everything, and still feeling empty. We live in a culture built on dissatisfaction, where the message is always, you don't have enough yet. But David is showing us the opposite. A life where the heart is satisfied, not because circumstances are perfect, but because the shepherd provides what's truly needed. And here's the challenge. Do we believe that? When bills pile up, when dreams fall apart, when loneliness creeps in, can we still say, "I shall not want"? The secret here is trust. It's not about ignoring our needs, but about trusting that the shepherd sees, knows, and provides in his way and his timing. Contentment isn't pretending everything is fine. It's resting in the truth that God is enough. That's why this single line, if understood, can shift your whole perspective on life. Because when you realize you already lack nothing in Christ, the endless chase for more suddenly loses its grip. He makes me lie down in green pastures. At first, that sounds calm and beautiful, like a picture on a postcard. But if you know sheep, you know how rare that actually is. Sheep don't lie down easily. For a sheep to rest, 4 conditions must be met. They must be free from fear, free from conflict, free from pests, and free from hunger. Only then will they lie down. So when David says, "He makes me lie down," he's saying that God provides a peace so complete that the soul can finally rest. Think about it. How many of us actually rest? Not just sleep at night, but real rest. Our minds are racing. Our hearts are heavy. We're pulled in 1,000 directions. Even when we're on vacation, we're still checking our phones, worrying about the next thing. We are restless sheep. And yet David is painting a picture of a shepherd who knows exactly how to calm us. He doesn't force us to rest out of control, but he gently makes the conditions right for us to find peace. The green pastures aren't just about food for sheep. They're about safety, security, and abundance. Here's the secret hidden in this line. Peace is not the absence of problems. It's the presence of the shepherd. We often think, if I could just fix this problem, if I could just get this job, if I could just pay off this debt, if I could just repair this relationship, then I could rest. But David knew better. He had enemies chasing him, dangers on every side, and yet he could still rest in God. The reason? Because the shepherd was near. Peace didn't come when life became easy. Peace came because the shepherd was with him. That's why this verse is so powerful. It reminds us that God doesn't just give us survival, He gives us rest for our weary souls. He doesn't want us to constantly be running on empty, fighting every battle in our own strength. He wants us to experience the stillness of trust, the kind of deep rest that says, even if the world is chaotic, I am safe in His care. Most people miss this secret because they think Psalm 23 is only for dark valleys or hard times. But here we see it's also for everyday life, for learning to lie down, to let go, to rest in the green pastures of His presence. He leads me beside still waters. For sheep, water is life. They need it every day to survive, but they're also terrified of it. A rushing river can sweep them away in seconds, so they avoid fast-moving streams. A good shepherd knows this, and instead of driving them to dangerous places, he gently guides them to calm, safe pools of water where they can drink without fear. David chooses this image on purpose because it tells us something about the way God cares for His people. He doesn't push us into chaos. He leads us into peace. Notice the word David uses. He leads me. Not He drives me, not He forces me. God isn't a harsh taskmaster standing behind us with a whip. He's a shepherd who walks ahead, inviting us to follow. That alone is a secret many people overlook. We often imagine God as someone pushing us into difficult places, dragging us where we don't want to go. But the truth is, He leads, and we choose whether to follow. His guidance is gentle, steady, always for our good. Now think about the water. Still waters represent more than physical refreshment. They symbolize spiritual renewal. Our souls are like dry, cracked ground, thirsty for something more. The world offers rushing currents, endless noise, distractions, temptations, false promises that sweep people away. But God offers still waters, a place of safety, of quiet, where we can actually hear His voice. In the busyness of life, when we feel drained, He doesn't just say, "Figure it out." He leads us to the source that restores our strength. The hidden truth here is that not all water is good water. Not everything that looks like refreshment actually gives life. Some things only increase the thirst, pulling us deeper into emptiness. But the shepherd knows where the true water is, and if we follow Him, we'll find it. This is why Jesus later said, "Whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst." David's shepherd is the same one who calls himself the living water. And the promise is clear. If we trust His leading, we won't be swept away by the chaos around us. We'll be refreshed, renewed, and sustained by the peace only He can give. He restores my soul. These 4 words carry a weight far heavier than most people realize. To restore something is not just to refresh it, but to bring it back to its original state, to repair what is broken, to give back what was lost. David wasn't just talking about a nice, relaxing moment that makes you feel better for a while. He was describing a God who puts broken lives back together. Shepherds in David's time had a term for a certain kind of sheep called a cast-down sheep. This was a sheep that had wandered off, gotten stuck, or even rolled onto its back and couldn't get up again. A sheep in that position was completely helpless. Its legs would kick in the air, its body would stiffen, and unless the shepherd found it quickly, the sheep would die either from predators or from suffocation under its own weight. When David says, "He restores my soul," he's using an image like that. He's saying, when I've fallen, when I'm helpless and unable to get myself up, my shepherd comes, lifts me back to my feet, and restores me. That's the secret here. Most people think following God is about never messing up, never falling, never straying. But David, who knew the depths of his own failure, shows us the opposite. He reminds us that God's heart is not to leave us lying helpless in our shame, but to restore us. David had been cast down many times, by fear, by sin, by grief. He knew what it felt like to be broken. But he also knew the joy of God's forgiveness, the healing of God's grace, the lifting power of God's hands. And that's why this verse is more than comfort. It's hope, because every one of us, at some point, becomes that cast-down sheep. We wander into sin. We fall under the weight of guilt. We find ourselves unable to stand again. And in that moment, the shepherd doesn't abandon us. He restores us. He doesn't just forgive our mistakes. He renews our dignity. He takes what was twisted and sets it right. He breathes life where there was despair. Most people miss this hidden promise of Psalm 23. They see it as a song of peace, but it is also a song of second chances. David is showing us a shepherd who doesn't just protect from the outside, but who mends what is broken on the inside. And that truth changes everything, because it means, no matter how far we've fallen, restoration is always possible. He leads me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. This line may sound like a simple statement about morality, but in David's world, it carried a vivid picture. Shepherds in Israel often had to guide their flocks through dangerous terrain, steep hillsides, narrow paths, rocky trails, where one wrong step could lead to disaster. Sheep, left on their own, would wander onto unsafe ground. They had no sense of direction, no instinct for safe paths. The shepherd's job was to lead them carefully along routes that would keep them alive. David takes that picture and connects it to the way God guides us. Paths of righteousness aren't just about keeping rules or living a moral life. They're about walking in alignment with the shepherd's direction. Righteousness means right relationship with God and with others. It's the safe path, the narrow trail that leads to life, not destruction. And here's the secret that most people miss. Obedience to God isn't about restriction. It's about protection. Think about how many times we resist God's leading because it feels limiting. We want freedom. We want choices. We want to explore the open field. But like sheep, our idea of freedom often leads us straight into danger. The shepherd doesn't restrict us because he's harsh. He guides us because he knows where life is found. Every command of God, every boundary he sets, is not to rob us of joy, but to keep us from harm. David adds another layer when he says, "For his name's sake." In ancient culture, a shepherd's reputation was tied to the condition of his flock. If the sheep were healthy, safe, and well-fed, it was a reflection of the shepherd's skill and care. In the same way, God's guidance in our lives reflects his own name. He doesn't lead us poorly or abandon us, because his very reputation is bound up in his promises. That means his faithfulness isn't dependent on our performance. It's rooted in his own character. So the hidden truth in this verse is this: walking in God's ways isn't about proving yourself righteous. It's about trusting the shepherd to lead you on the right path. The reason we can walk with confidence isn't because we know the way, but because we know the one who does. And when you understand that, the paths of righteousness stop feeling like heavy rules and start feeling like a gift, an assurance that we are not wandering aimlessly, but being led with purpose, step by step, for his glory. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. This is the most quoted part of Psalm 23, and for good reason. It strikes at the heart of our deepest fear, death itself. But David is not just talking about the moment of dying. In the original Hebrew, the phrase can also mean the darkest valley. It paints the picture of deep ravines in Israel, where predators hid and shadows swallowed the path. These valleys were places of real danger, where a shepherd had to stay close to protect the flock. Notice David doesn't say, "If I walk through the valley," but "even though I walk through." He assumes valleys will come. Life will not always be green pastures and still waters. There will be seasons of grief, loss, betrayal, illness, and fear. The question is not if, but when. And here's the hidden detail most people miss. David doesn't say he's stuck in the valley. He says he walks through it. Valleys are temporary. They are part of the journey, not the destination. The shepherd doesn't abandon us there. He leads us through. David also declares, "I will fear no evil." That doesn't mean evil isn't present. It means evil doesn't have the final word. Why? Because you are with me. This is the turning point of the psalm. Up until now, David has spoken about God in the third person. He makes me lie down, he leads me, he restores me. But here in the valley, his language changes. It's no longer he, it's you. In the darkest moments, God's presence becomes personal. He's no longer just a distant shepherd described in theory. He is the God who walks beside us. And this is the secret most people miss. The valley isn't proof that God has left you. It's the place where his nearness becomes most real. The shadows only exist because there is light nearby. Death may cast its shadow, but it cannot stop the presence of the shepherd who walks with you. David knew this firsthand, whether he was facing enemies in battle or the grief of losing a child. The valley was real, but so was God's presence. That's why he could say with confidence, "I will fear no evil," because in the end, it wasn't about the size of the valley, but the presence of the shepherd. "Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." For most of us today, those words don't mean much. A rod and a staff sound like old farm tools with little relevance to our lives. But to a shepherd, these were essential. The rod was a short, sturdy club used for protection. It was the shepherd's weapon, something he could use to defend his flock against wild animals or attackers. The staff, on the other hand, was tall and slender, with a hook at the end. It was used for guiding the sheep, pulling them back when they strayed, or rescuing them from dangerous spots. Together, they symbolized both strength and care. David is saying something profound here. He doesn't just find comfort in green pastures or still waters. He finds comfort in the shepherd's tools of discipline and defense. Most people miss this. We like the idea of God protecting us, but we often resist the idea of God correcting us. Yet both are part of his love. The rod protects us from enemies we cannot see, battles we don't even know are happening. The staff guides us when we wander off course, nudging us back onto the right path. Without them, sheep would be lost, vulnerable, and doomed. This is the hidden truth of the verse. Comfort doesn't always come from soft words or easy circumstances. Sometimes real comfort comes from knowing God is strong enough to fight for you and loving enough to pull you back when you drift. A shepherd who never uses the rod would leave his sheep open to attack. A shepherd who never uses the staff would let them wander off cliffs. In the same way, God's care involves both protection and correction. David had experienced both. He knew what it was to be rescued from enemies, but he also knew what it was to be corrected by God after his own sin. And instead of resenting it, he found comfort in it. Because the discipline of the shepherd is not meant to shame but to save. That's why David could say, "Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." He understood that true comfort isn't just about feeling good in the moment. It's about being kept safe for the journey. "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." This line shifts the imagery from fields and valleys to something almost shocking. Imagine being surrounded by enemies, people who want to destroy you, and instead of running or hiding, you sit down to a feast. That's the picture David paints here. God doesn't just protect us from afar. He honors us right in the middle of danger. In David's time, to prepare a table wasn't just about food. It was about fellowship, security, and victory. Sitting at a table in the presence of enemies meant those enemies had no power to harm you. It was a declaration. "You can surround me, but you cannot touch me, because the Lord himself is my host." This is more than survival. It's triumph. Here's the secret most people miss. God doesn't always remove the enemies from your life. He doesn't always silence the critics, eliminate the haters, or erase the struggles. Instead, he blesses you in front of them. He shows his favor not by eliminating opposition, but by displaying his goodness despite it. That's why David uses the image of a table, not a battlefield. God isn't rushing to get you out of trouble. He's showing that even in the presence of trouble, you are secure, honored, and cared for. Think about how different this is from the way we usually think. We often pray, "God, take away my enemies, remove the problems, end the conflict." But sometimes God says, "No, I'm going to prepare a feast right here. I'm going to show my power in the very place where fear tried to consume you." And when that happens, the enemies can only watch. They can't stop the blessing. They can't cancel God's favor. and they can't undo his protection. David understood this. He spent years hunted by Saul, betrayed by friends, surrounded by armies, yet he also experienced God's presence providing for him even then. The table was proof. God wasn't just keeping him alive, he was giving him victory. That's the hidden truth. God's blessing doesn't wait until the battle is over. Sometimes it shows up right in the middle of it, as a reminder that he is greater than anything against you. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. In ancient times, anointing with oil was a powerful symbol. Kings and priests were anointed as a sign of being chosen and set apart by God. But in the shepherd's world, anointing a sheep's head with oil had a very practical purpose. Oil was used to protect sheep from flies and parasites that could drive them mad, laying eggs and causing infections. It was also applied to heal wounds and keep them safe from irritation. So when David says, "You anoint my head with oil," he's speaking about both divine honor and daily care. God not only calls us his own, he protects us from the little things that can torment our minds, and he heals us when we are wounded. This is the part most people overlook. We expect God to deal with the big, dramatic battles in our lives. But David shows us that he also cares about the small, unseen struggles. The shepherd knows how even tiny irritations can wear down a soul. The oil represents his spirit, covering us, soothing us, protecting us from what would otherwise destroy our peace. That's the secret in this verse. God's care is not only about survival in the valley or triumph over enemies. It's also about daily renewal, the gentle healing that keeps us whole. Then David adds, "My cup overflows." This isn't the picture of barely getting by. It's not scraping through life with just enough to survive. It's abundance. It's blessing poured out beyond what you can contain. In biblical times, an overflowing cup was a sign of generosity and honor. To have a host fill your cup until it spilled over was a way of saying, "You are welcome here. You will never lack while you are in my presence." That's the image David gives of God. The hidden truth is that God is not stingy with his love. He doesn't just give us enough to make it to the next day. He pours out grace, mercy, and joy until it overflows. That doesn't mean life will always feel easy, but it means there is always more of him than the challenges we face. Oil for healing, a cup for abundance. Together, they remind us that God's care is both intimate and overflowing. He tends to our wounds, guards our minds, and then fills our lives with more than enough of his presence. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. With this line, David moves from describing God's actions in specific moments, restoring, guiding, protecting, to declaring a lifelong promise. He is saying that no matter what, his journey will be marked by God's goodness and mercy. But here's what most people miss. The word follow, in Hebrew, is much stronger than our English translation. It doesn't mean a casual trailing behind. It means to pursue, to chase after. David isn't saying that goodness and mercy just quietly walk behind him. He's saying God's love actively hunts him down. That's a radical truth. Most of us spend our lives chasing after goodness, chasing after blessings, chasing after something to satisfy us. But Psalm 23 flips the picture. It says that when the Lord is your shepherd, you don't have to run after goodness and mercy. They run after you. God's love isn't passive. His mercy doesn't sit still, waiting for you to deserve it. His goodness doesn't appear only when you've done enough right things. These are active forces, tied to the heart of God, moving toward you every single day of your life. Think about David's story. He had moments of great triumph, but also seasons of deep failure. He committed sins that would make most of us wonder if God could ever forgive. Yet David looks back on his life and says, "Through it all, God's goodness and mercy never stopped chasing me." That's the secret hidden here. God's love is not fragile. It's not dependent on our performance. It doesn't crumble when we fail. It follows us relentlessly, even into the darkest places. And notice David's confidence. He doesn't say, "Maybe goodness and mercy will follow me." He says, "Surely." He knows it with certainty, because it's grounded in who God is, not in who he is. That means this promise isn't just for David. It's for anyone who calls the Lord their shepherd. All the days of your life, on the best days and the worst, in success and in failure, God's goodness and mercy are not just present, they are pursuing you. That's a truth most people miss, but it's one that changes everything, because it means you are never outside the reach of his love. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. With this final line, David shifts from the present to eternity. Up until now, the psalm has been about life, green pastures, still waters, valleys, enemies, tables, oil, and overflowing cups. But here David lifts his eyes beyond this world and declares a future that never ends. Dwelling in the house of the Lord doesn't mean visiting a temple once in a while. It means living permanently in the presence of God. It's about belonging, being home, never being separated from him again. For David, this was not just a hope, it was a certainty. Notice his confidence. He doesn't say, "I hope I will dwell," or "maybe one day I'll dwell." He says, "I will dwell." That assurance came not from his own righteousness, but from the shepherd who had led him every step of the way. The one who guided him through pastures and valleys would also guide him into eternal rest. That's the ultimate secret hidden in Psalm 23. It's not only about life here and now. It's about life that stretches beyond death. Most people read Psalm 23 as a passage for funerals, a comfort in loss. And while it certainly brings peace in grief, David didn't write it as a funeral song. He wrote it as a declaration of confidence in a living God whose care doesn't stop at the grave. The valley of the shadow of death is not the end. It's a doorway into the eternal house of the Lord. That's why this psalm has been a source of hope for countless generations. It reminds us that no matter what happens in this life, our story does not end here. David knew what it was to be homeless, to hide in caves, to be exiled from his throne, to long for safety. But here, he proclaims the greatest truth. No matter where he wandered on earth, his final dwelling would be with God. And that same promise belongs to every believer. The shepherd who restores, leads, protects, and provides will also bring his flock home forever. That's the climax of Psalm 23. Not just survival in the present, but eternal security in the presence of the Lord. Psalm 23 is more than a passage to memorize or recite in difficult times. It is a map of God's heart toward us. From the very first words to the last, it shows a shepherd who provides, restores, protects, and never lets go. And the secret that most people miss is this: it's not about the sheep, it's about the shepherd. Every promise in these verses flows from who he is, not from what we do. That means no matter how lost you feel, no matter how dark the valley seems, no matter how strong the enemies appear, you are never outside the care of the shepherd. This psalm isn't just comfort for the dying, it's strength for the living. It reminds you that your life is guided, not random. It assures you that goodness and mercy aren't things you have to chase. They are already chasing you, and it gives you the greatest promise of all, that your final destination is not fear, not loss, not emptiness, but the eternal house of the Lord. So the next time you hear Psalm 23, don't let it wash over you as just familiar words. Let it sink deep as a personal declaration. Read it the way David meant it, as the testimony of someone who had walked through every season of life and found God faithful in them all. If you grasp that truth, this psalm will no longer be something you quote out of habit. It will become the anchor of your life, the secret that changes the way you see everything. And once you see it, you'll never be able to read Psalm 23 the same way again.